Hey everyone, did you know that the Steam machine is now sort of on pre-order and also it sort of looks disappointing for the price? We're gonna talk about all of that and why it might not achieve Valve's goals or even push Linux gaming forward at that price to performance ratio. We're also going to talk about Epic Games' sort of GIT competitor that they just released and open sourced, and we also have a bunch of other Linux news in this episode, and we of course also have this message from our sponsor. So this video is sponsored by TuxCare. They provide an entire suite of services to automate and simplify the security of your open source stack. They have rebootless patching for Linux server fleets. They have a single trusted repo of continuously vetted and secured open source packages across 6 language ecosystems, and also endless lifecycle support that carries protection for those packages past end of life, which also extends to your Linux distros, runtimes, and applications. And speaking of which, they also added min.io to this endless lifecycle support. So you can receive CVE patches for min.io releases that have gone end of life, and you can keep using what already works without worrying about security, or you can use that extra peace of mind to plan a migration. Min.io was archived in February 2026, meaning it will not get any security patches or bug fixes, except that TuxCare will deliver all of that for you. All you have to do is run their script to get updates straight from their repo, and you're all set. If you want to learn more, the link is down in the description, and you'll also find on their websites all the other solutions that they support with this same endless lifecycle support. So let's talk about the Steam machine first. Valve officially announced the Steam machine's price. It will be 1,040 euros, about the same in US dollars, for the 512GB storage version, and 1,108 euros, again about the same in dollars, for a version with a Steam controller. There's also a 2TB version, no 1TB one, for 1,360 euros, or with a controller at 1,428 euros. These two higher capacity versions also come with additional faceplates, one in a red fabric and the other made out of walnut, although I'm sure you'll be able to get them individually if you want that, because Valve made a big deal about the fact you can change these faceplates. You can't quite pre-order it, but you can join a list that is randomized. So you just enter on that list. Once the window is closed, they will automatically randomize one time everyone that entered the list, and this will determine whether you can order one Steam machine right now or whether you are on the wait list. They say it will be less frustrating and more fair this way, which, yes, you're not being penalized for being in a different time zone, for having slower internet, for not using an automated script or a bot, so that's good. Apparently they will also use that time window to check on each sign up to try and remove the ones that look like duplicates and to fight scalpers. The issue is I'm not sure they're going to sell a whole lot of them because the machine, according to the first tests, does seem disappointing for the price. I used to think it would be comparable to a PS5 Pro, but it looks like it more along the lines of a base PS5, and it costs basically twice as much with a controller. So in terms of pure value to performance, it really doesn't seem quite there. The issues mainly seem due to the RDNA 3 GPU, which is basically a laptop chip with 8 gigs of VRAM, which seems like it will struggle with ray tracing, which more and more games use by default, and will require heavy use of FSR to achieve the stated 4K 60 FPS that Valve put on their website, which apparently is not really achievable if you want your game to look at least half decent. Now, on the pros side of things, the setup seems easy enough, the device itself stays really cool and really silent apparently, and also it has access to 30,000 games, which is the most games any console realistically achieved out of the box ever, I think. And of course you're also buying a real PC, not just a gaming appliance, so you can get more out of it in the long run. Games will be cheaper on Steam mostly, there's no subscription service to play online, you might already have a massive library that you can play there, and when this device becomes incapable of running anything in like 3 months because game devs can't optimize games anymore, then you will at least be able to use it as a media center, as another PC, as a desktop, as a NAS, or whatever else you want. Also, it is upgradable for your RAM and SSD, so that's extra longevity, a little bit at least. Now there's another issue, which is the fact that all Steam machines apparently have a single 16 gigs RAM stick, which obviously is less good than two 8 gigs RAM sticks, but Valve said it was virtually impossible to buy 8 gigs ones, so they put a single one. It makes a small performance difference, not huge, but it is a difference. It does come with the added benefit that you can just buy another 16 gigs stick and slot it in there to move to 32, whereas if you had two 8 gig sticks, you would have had to buy 2 16 gig sticks. So that's at least something. Now, at that price to performance ratio, I don't think it quite makes sense, at least for me personally. If you don't already have something like a PlayStation 5 or a gaming PC that is on the same level as a PS5 or thereabouts, then maybe you want to go there for the entire Steam library you might already have for the upgradability, and maybe if you need to use it as a PC too, that's okay. But even then, I do feel that if you just want to do gaming, probably a PS5 is a better bet, especially since you will get all the PlayStation games that are no longer going to come to PC for some of those exclusives. So I just don't think Valve did the right thing here. I know it's out of their control. The prices of RAM, the prices of storage are insane, and they can't quite subsidize the system that heavily because they're not going to recoup the costs as heavily. Gonna get some money from Steam sales, but they don't have a subscription service. They don't have an entire hardware ecosystem where hardware manufacturers and peripherals manufacturers will pay them a little bit of money to be compatible with SteamOS, something PlayStation has, for example. So they can't subsidize the device heavily, but here I just don't think it makes sense. And it also looks like they completely missed the mark on the hardware side of things. The things that they put in that device are just not good enough in 2026. Even at something like $700, which was stuff that people initially had in mind before the AI craze and all the RAM shortages, that would have been a hard sell, because at that point the PS5 would not have gone up in price that much, and so you would still be looking at like $200 to $300 more for something that does the same thing as a console that released 4-5 years ago. I just don't think it's great value, even at a PS5's price. So this is probably not going to appeal to a lot of people. It still has its use cases, it's still an intriguing device, but personally I'm just not going to buy one right now. I'll wait for the price to drop, if it ever does. But on the bright side of things, you can now make your own Steam machine, officially, because there's SteamOS 3.8, it now has an install media that you can use to install it on any computer. The ISO is still named like it's a Steam Deck recovery image, but it is fully installable on any PC that has an AMD or Intel GPU. If you have an NVIDIA GPU, that's just not going to work. They only officially support the Deck and the Legion Go S, but they have beta support for the Legion Go, for the ROG Ally and Ally X, for all handhelds using AMD, and for all PCs using AMD GPUs. Don't expect things to be fully perfect on this beta-supported device, but it should run really well already. The instructions still refer to using a Steam Deck, it's an early effort, but trying it out in a VM, you can install it, and so you can probably just build your own device with SteamOS if the Steam machine is not up to your liking. That's pretty good. I still don't understand why NVIDIA support is still not there. SteamOS has been released for the Steam Deck for a long while now. They had a lot of time to optimize their big picture mode. For NVIDIA drivers aren't as terrible. They do use the regular standards that you might be expecting on Linux and with Wayland. I really don't know what's the holdup here. They say they are working with NVIDIA to try and fix all of that stuff, but I don't know what is there to fix. NVIDIA works with Steam, NVIDIA works with games, NVIDIA works with Wayland compositors. I just don't quite understand what's lacking there. Now, Epic Games released their own version control system called Lore. It is meant specifically for big projects that combine source code and big binaries. So basically, maybe movies with VFX or video games, of course. Now, GIT is a fantastic solution, that's the one virtually everyone uses, but it's really good at handling text files, so code, but it's not necessarily optimized if you throw in big images, big videos, big textures, 3D models, basically things that use a lot of storage space. What Lore brings for these use cases is that it fetches data only when you need it, instead of always downloading the entire repo all the time. So when you want to refresh a few source code files that your buddy worked on yesterday, you don't have to pull all the textures that have changed in the process unless you actually really want them as well. You can exclude things from being downloaded when you update the repo if you don't think you're gonna need it. Large files can be split into chunks too, so you don't have to download the entire changed file every time if the data in only one of the chunks has changed. You just download the chunk that has changed. Branches are references, not full copies, so you're also saving space, and of course there is a command line interface and APIs to work with many languages. Now, obviously, this will not dethrone Git for most projects because what it brings is really specific to a few use cases. Git will probably remain the default tool that everyone uses for software development, but it does look interesting. It's been a while since we've seen a new version control system, and so that's an interesting one. If you tried it out, let me know how it worked. Do you remember the BcacheFS file system that created a lot of drama a while back because their developer just did not want to follow the kernel's development guidelines? Well, this is now out of experimental status, which might reopen the door for maybe it coming back to the Linux kernel. This thing is now considered usable, at least by its main developer. That doesn't mean it is fully ready for everyone, it is just no longer in the if something breaks, you're on your own kind of phase. There are also some interesting features added, like reconcile, which lets the file system move data around in the background to make sure everything is located where it should be, or replicated properly. There are also performance improvements in there, there's a rewrite of the user space code in Rust, and of course all of this is currently still only available as a DKMS module with packages for many popular distros like Debian, Ubuntu, Arch, Fedora, OpenSUSE, NixOS, and Gentoo. So it's not fully stable yet, but it is an indicator that maybe work can be a little bit slower. The reason why BcacheFS was kicked out of the kernel was because the developer wanted to make plenty of changes in the middle of a kernel release cycle, which is a big no-no in the Linux kernel development process. But now that things are more stable, they probably won't need to do that sort of stuff. So maybe it can be re-added back into the kernel with that extra stability. We'll see if that happens or if the developer prefers working on their own as an external module. Now, XFCE has its own Wayland compositor, at least in alpha. It's called XFWL4 and it's been released as a preview. It is described as being ready for some wider use, so of course not fully stable yet. Their goal with the compositor is to fully replicate the existing XFCE experience that comes from X11 as closely as possible, but on Wayland, so people will just not notice the difference. They said there's more work to be done to get as close as possible, but that this is already a solid first draft. There are bugs and limitations, it is an alpha, so there are no off-screen margin support, the workspaces aren't fully implemented, mouse and touchpad settings don't work yet, some thumbnails and panel applets aren't finished, session restore isn't there either, that kind of stuff. But it does mean that XFCE will not be left behind as more and more distros decide to go Wayland only and maybe start ditching X11 packages entirely. XFCE will be future-proof, basically, which is good, because even though it is a desktop I don't really want to use personally, I know a lot of people who really like it, and it is a big part of the Linux ecosystem for a more lightweight, very customizable option. Still on desktop environments, the Cosmic desktop got its first point release, version 1.1. This mostly brings a new default application. This is a system monitor for Cosmic. It uses the usual iced toolkit that other default Cosmic apps rely upon. It will replace the GNOME system monitor in PopOS, and it looks like a standard system monitor. It has graphs, the list of apps, processes, and monitoring of all the usual components of your device. There's nothing extremely fancy or specific, but it looks functional. The compositor also got improvements to avoid slowly using more and more CPU cycles over time. Pinned workspaces can be named now. The pointer warp Wayland protocol is implemented, useful for plenty of video games. There are more MIME-type icons too, and a few other changes and fixes here and there. So basically it's kind of the same sort of stuff that we've seen in previous Cosmic 1.0 point something releases. Just looks like they want to change the naming scheme, so every time they add a new app or new features, it's a 1.x version, and every time it's just small bug fixes, it's a 1.x.x version to try and just differentiate that and classify these updates separately. We're still waiting on Epoch 2 and PopOS 26.04. I'm sure this will come relatively soon, and this will bring many more improvements compared to the current Cosmic version that you have. Now, on the open web side of things, we've got some news about Wikipedia because they're clapping back at AI. One of their co-founders said that the problem of AI hallucinations remains very bad, and so they decided they will not let AI edit pages directly because they simply cannot trust it enough. That's a position I fully agree on. Don't base your knowledge on AI, they're wrong too often to be reliable. He also said that while Wikipedia's human-generated traffic is slowly dropping, it is not a disaster, but the giant number of visits from AI bots is hammering their servers really hard. He says that AI companies now really need to pay their fair share. Their bots are costing Wikipedia real money with all that bandwidth. And he also said that Wikipedia has successfully signed deals with a few tech giants and that they're starting to block the companies that do not behave. And that's a really good thing. This entire open model for knowledge, source code, or whatever only really works if individuals can get access to it for free and contribute, and companies who want to benefit from all of that work pay to access it and use it for their own financial gain. This is where the money should come from, and I'm glad Wikipedia is now handling things differently and making AI companies pay, because if not, they're just profiting off of the work of many, many contributors without giving back anything, and also while actually killing the website for actual humans, which is not good. But we also have some other news for Wikipedia, this time a little bit more controversial. They apparently decided to ban the other co-founder, Larry Sanger, after it was found that he was engaging in what is apparently called canvassing. This is a thing I didn't know about, but apparently it's just someone with a big following using their followers to try and influence Wikipedia's decision process or content and make changes quickly and globally, and it's generally done for pushing specific political views or specifically orientated information. Sanger was apparently well known for saying Wikipedia is leaning left, is ideologically biased, and he says that this ban is proof that something is wrong at Wikipedia. The community of Wikipedia editors said that there were clear signs that Sanger was not here to actually improve the encyclopedia, he was here to make changes to how things were presented that would favor their own worldview. The gist of the problem seems to be that the project Sanger brought up, called Wiki Project Intellectual Diversity, is not against the rules at all. It is a normal project. But as soon as that project was being discussed to be included as an official Wikipedia project, Sanger used his 91,000 followers on X to try and influence that decision, which is not allowed, obviously, because this would mean the loudest person or the most well-known person could just run rampant on the site and do whatever they wanted. Sanger was apparently warned about similar behaviors in the past, but he persisted, and he's now framing the issue as being mob rule or being an actual trial, using terms like prosecution, judge, and the like, which it's not a prosecution, it's an internal decision process. And now here is my opinion on this. Does Wikipedia have a left-leaning bias, whatever left or right means in your own country or worldview? Probably yes. Just like everything related to knowledge, scientific education, academia, there's generally a left-leaning bias there. It's not necessarily because teachers try to push their own worldview onto influenceable students, because believe me, if that was the case, then we would have had a left-leaning government in most of the world for years now. That has not happened in most countries in the world. So that's not the case. It happens, but it doesn't happen at scale. One of the main reasons most of these education-related fields are left-leaning is probably because the idea of sharing knowledge and information generally comes from people who are more left-leaning, more socially oriented, more humanists, people who want to share knowledge with others, people who want to educate others, people who want to level the playing field instead of letting everyone get to the same point wherever they started in life. Those tendencies are generally more associated towards the left. And so if these people are the ones contributing the knowledge, teaching the knowledge, then these people will invariably bring their own biases with them. Doesn't mean they're trying to influence people, it just means that's how they see the world. Now, should you ban a project that is trying to bring different worldviews? No. Should you ban said project if it breaks the rules? Yes, the rules are here to be enforced. If you break them, you excluded yourself out of the process. You're not being silenced, you're not being censored, you're not a victim. You decided to break the rules that you knew existed. This is literally the meme of the guy taking the stick and placing it in the wheels of his bike and then complaining because he's hurt. You did this to yourself voluntarily. You knew the rules, you broke them, you got kicked out. There's no other framing that can exist here. It's your own fault. We might finally see the end of these terrible captchas / identify the bike or red light kind of roadblocks online. Cloudflare partnered with Firefox, Chrome, and Edge, so they partnered with Firefox and Chrome because Edge is Chrome, to implement a protocol that would replace that captcha crap while still allowing to identify malicious traffic. They say that we need to change this. Now, not because it is the worst thing anyone could be asked to do online just to have the rights to read an article. No, it is because AI exists and they can bypass these relatively easily. So, they want to keep things private and they want to remove that roadblock. So they will use a token system for that, called PACT, for Privacy Access Token. Websites can issue these attestation certificates, basically, to a person's browser when they have assessed or estimated that this browser is being used by a real person. And after that, the browser gains the ability to generate tokens that are recognized because the browser was assessed as being used by a human in the past. Other websites that want to see if a visitor is human can request a token, the browser generates it, and if they were assessed previously, the token is valid, and so things work. That token is anonymous, by the way. It is not a one-time identifier that is linked to your browsing, so it should be relatively safe. The only thing that the initial website provides is attestation, and this unlocks the capability of your browser to generate those tokens each time they're needed. Now, my main worry on this is interoperability. If it's a lockdown API, then of course it is unacceptable, but apparently it will be interoperable. It is just a spec, all browsers and websites would need to implement it, so it is far from being there, but the idea is interesting. As long as all websites can use it, whether they use Cloudflare services or not, as long as all browsers can implement it, and it's not a mess to implement that would exclude alternative browser projects, then I'm all for it. CAPTCHAs are terrible, they're extremely annoying, sometimes you have to do them 3 times for some reason, so removing that and having an automated system in the background is better. As long as it is not privacy invasive, as long as it doesn't favor fingerprinting, and as long as it doesn't favor any specific browser or company, then that works. If any of those conditions aren't true, then I don't want it and I would prefer clicking on red lights. There is a new initiative aiming at fixing and improving Linux, this time for specific use cases like visual effects, animation, and all of that sort of stuff. It's called the Wayland for Artists Working Group, and it's emanating from the Academy Software Foundation. They're an organization with the aim of improving open source software for the content creation industry. So the Wayland for Artists group is basically trying to gather information, opinions, and potentially improvements too around using this type of software on Linux and on Wayland specifically. They want to try and make Linux a viable platform using Wayland for all of this. They say the industry doesn't really understand the impact of the Wayland transition on their software currently, whether they are open source software or not. Specifically, they mention the remote access solutions that are apparently widely used here, something that X11 handles really well, and that Wayland sort of requires remote desktops for, which aren't necessarily as efficient. They will study everything from graphics tablet support to input focus to keyboard shortcuts to desktop customization, remote access, GPU acceleration, color management, HDR, and other things, and then they'll propose a set of shared goals with a roadmap for implementation. And honestly, for all of that stuff, I feel that Wayland is already a better platform than X11, because that's the only place where you can get a color management pipeline, where you can get HDR, when you can get high-resolution monitors, multi-monitor setups, working with different fractional scaling factors, with different variable refresh rates, or variable refresh rate at all. So just on that, Wayland is better. We also already have graphics tablet support, at least Katie did a lot of work on that. We also have global keyboard shortcuts. The only really missing thing is the network transparency that X11 has. Basically, let you run a single application on a computer somewhere and just get that application over the network on your own X server if you want that, which is very helpful. On Wayland, you need a remote desktop. That is just not as efficient because you're streaming the entire desktop, not just a single application. Now let's finish this with some Linux gaming news. First, we have a new version of GE Proton, which is a major one. They ripped out everything related to GStreamer, which is what powered the media decoding for Proton, what let you play movies inside of video games. It was also combined with FFmpeg, some Windows DLLs, and this created apparently a lot of issues that required workarounds. So they replaced everything with Quartz, then some Windows DLLs and FFmpeg, so there's only one path for media decoding, which apparently works much better. This makes 100 games play out of the box without any use of additional wine tricks or DLLs. This includes the recent Resident Evil games, Halo Infinite, Final Fantasy XIV, a lot of the Persona games, Mortal Kombat 11, Bully, Borderlands 3, and a lot more. The issue with this, and the reason why it won't be used in official Proton, is the heavy use of AI to generate that code and to reproduce how the Direct Show API works for DirectX. This is a practice Codeweavers has forbidden in their repo. They're the ones mostly contributing to Wine and apparently having a say on Wine's repos, so this code will very likely not make it into Wine and or Proton unless Valve decides to pull it themselves and to move away from Wine as it is, or unless Codeweavers relent and decide to only allow this specific patch maybe after they looked at it. This is good because it means plenty of games will just work with GE Proton out of the box without any additional manual tweaking, which makes Linux gaming easier. The problem is GE Proton is not the default, and so when you bring a new user onto Linux, what they get is regular Proton, and so they're gonna look online, they're gonna be told you need to use GE Proton, so they're gonna learn about Proton Up, the graphical tool to install alternative versions, they're gonna have to shut down Steam, download this, restart Steam, go to the game's properties, change that to GE Proton. It's not hard, but it makes things look complicated. They have to understand a whole bunch of concepts to just be able to play the game, whereas of course if these changes were straight in Proton itself, then it wouldn't really be an issue. So it is great for people in the know, but for newcomers it adds the same layer of complexity as trying to run wine tricks. It's easier to do, but you need to understand the exact same concepts to achieve it. It's the same mental load. And to conclude, DXVK got a major new version 3.0, and they moved to another shader compiler entirely. It's called DXVK SPR-V, which replaces the entirety of the previous code. Apparently it solves a lot of problems that were just not fixable in the previous shader translation code, the part that takes DirectX shaders and translates them to Vulkan so they can work on Linux. So now, even if a game uses shaders incorrectly or in a weird way, even if Microsoft's own compiler produces invalid code, this should work much better on Linux. It also spits out SPR-V code, which is apparently way more compact, and so it reduces RAM usage in games. They cite God of War dropping a whopping 1 gig of RAM when in use with this new code. This won't improve performance for most games, but if your system was swapping, if your RAM was fully, completely used by your game, then probably yes, you will gain a little bit of performance. Shader translation now also runs on worker threads instead of the main application thread, which will lead to launch time reduction. There are also improvements to cases where games were CPU bound or GPU bound on NVIDIA GPUs. You will need the latest NVIDIA drivers to enjoy that though. DirectX 8 and 9 games will also see improvements with reduced memory usage. You also have DXVK working better with basic Wine, no longer requiring specific Proton patches. You can expect the usual game-specific fixes too for BioShock Infinite, Borderlands 2, Fallout New Vegas, Max Payne, CSGO, Splinter Cell 4, The Sims 3, Total War Pharaoh and more, but DXVK now requires Vulkan 1.4. This shouldn't be an issue for 99.9% of people. The only people who might not be able to use this new version are the ones stuck on very, very old Vulkan drivers that are unmaintained. Maybe if you use a very old, stable distro that has never updated their Mesa drivers, you might have an issue, but as far as I can tell, most drivers that you're really going to use for gaming should support that properly. That is pretty fantastic work. Let's remember that gaming on Linux for a lot of titles yields better performance than on Windows and yields lower resource usage. So if this can reduce usage further and lead to potentially better performance too, then we're really stepping up and really outclassing Windows even more, and that's really nice. And if you do need a new device to handle DXVK 3.0, then you can check out our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. You all know about Tuxedo by now if you've listened to a single one of these episodes for the past few years. They are a hardware manufacturer that makes devices that ship with Linux pre-installed. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and they make virtually everything from the smaller form factor laptops that are more affordable all the way up to giant workstations, towers, gaming devices. You name it, you have a lot of choice for the hardware, for the keyboard layouts, for the logo you want or no logo on the lid of your laptop. Basically, you decide, and you know that Linux will just run fantastically on those devices. I only use Tuxedo Computers to do everything that you see or hear from me, so as usual, the link is down in the description. They're fantastic, I can only recommend them. Anyway, this will conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it or watching it or whatever else you did. You have all the usual YouTube buttons and comment sections and whatever. Please do use them. It really, really helps make those videos more popular and introduce more people to Linux. You also have plenty of links in the description to support the channel if you want to do so. And that's it, basically. I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!